He was a quiet boy, one who mostly kept to himself, and yet he had a world inside him that nobody else seemed to see. The house he lived in was small, not much more than a single floor with a tiny living room that doubled as a kitchen. The walls were painted in colors that had faded over time, and the windows often let in the sound of the bustling street outside. Despite all this, there was a corner in that small home that had something special: an old piano. It was worn and scratched, its keys slightly yellowed, but to him it was more than an object. It was a gateway to a world where he felt alive. Ever since he could remember, he had been fascinated by the piano. He would spend hours pressing the keys, sometimes making music, sometimes just experimenting with sounds, discovering patterns that pleased his ears. No one had taught him properly. He learned by watching videos, reading small tutorials, and listening to pieces that moved him. At first, it was just curiosity, just a way to escape the dullness of everyday life, but over time it became a part of him. He practiced every chance he got, sneaking in moments whenever he was alone. He knew he wasn't perfect, and he knew his music sounded rough, but it gave him hope. School was a different story. Among the chatter and laughter, the teasing and the games, he often felt out of place. Most of the boys played football or video games, and the girls would talk about trends in social media. When he tried to talk about music, about the piano, people would laugh. They did not understand it, and worse, they made fun of him. At first, he tried to ignore it, pretending he did not care, but deep down, it stung. It hurt to be laughed at for something that gave him joy. He could hear their whispers as he walked past the cafeteria, see their smirks when he mentioned he had been practicing. He tried to tell himself that they just did not understand. But sometimes it was hard to believe. One afternoon, the school announced a small talent show. It was nothing major, just a chance for students to show what they could do in front of their peers. For the first time, he felt both excitement and fear. Could he perform in front of all those people? Could he face the laughter that seemed inevitable? His heart raced at the thought, but there was also a voice inside him that whispered, "Maybe this is my chance to show them what I can do. Maybe they will finally see what I see." He went home that day and sat at the piano. The sunlight was slipping through the window, casting a golden glow over the keys. He ran his fingers over them, remembering the melodies he had been practicing. He played softly at first, tentative and unsure, and then he found a rhythm that made his chest lift with excitement. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move, letting the music flow from his mind to his heart to his hands. In that moment, the world outside, the teasing, the doubt, the laughter did not exist. It was just him and the piano, creating something beautiful out of persistence and dreams. As the day of the talent show approached, he practiced more and more. Every spare moment was spent at the piano. He memorized the pieces, refined the tricky parts, and tried to bring emotion into every note. He imagined the audience listening, imagining them being moved by his music. It was a strange mix of excitement and terror, but he knew he could not back down. Deep inside, he wanted to prove to himself, and maybe even to others, that he could do this. When the day arrived, he felt a mix of nerves and determination. He wore his usual clothes, simple and unassuming, trying not to draw attention to himself. As he waited backstage, he could hear the other students performing. Some danced, some sang, and each performance seemed to get applause. He felt a knot in his stomach, wondering if anyone would clap for him. He peeked at the audience and saw the familiar faces, the ones who had laughed at him, and for a moment, he thought about running away. But then he remembered the hours he had spent practicing, the music that had become a part of him, and he knew he could not let fear win. Finally, it was his turn. He walked onto the stage, the wooden floor cool under his feet, the bright lights shining down. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. He could feel the eyes on him, and yes, some of the whispers and snickers began. He could almost hear them thinking, "Who is this kid? What can he do?" But he pushed those thoughts aside. He placed his hands on the keys and let the first note ring out. It was soft, almost timid, but it was the start of something. And then he played another, and slowly the music began to flow. Carrying him forward at first, some of the students continued to giggle, unsure of what to make of the sounds coming from the piano. But as he continued, his fingers moving with confidence and emotion, something began to change. The melodies grew stronger, the harmonies richer, and the music filled the room in a way that was impossible to ignore. The laughter faded. Eyes widened. Some students leaned forward, captivated by the boy and the piano that seemed to come alive under his hands. He could feel the music pouring out of him, and with it, courage he had never known he possessed. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen. The teasing, the ridicule, the doubts, they all seemed to vanish in the face of his determination and talent. He played not for applause, not for recognition, but because it was who he was. And yet, as the final note lingered in the room, there was a silence. A pause where everyone absorbed what they had just heard. And then, slowly, a few claps, quiet at first, and then louder as more joined in. Some of the students who had laughed before now looked at him with respect, their expressions a mix of awe and surprise. The boy felt a warm rush of emotions, relief, pride, and an unexpected joy. He had faced the mockery, the doubts, and he had triumphed, if only in this small, shining moment. After the performance, people came up to him. Some wanted to compliment his playing, some simply nodded in acknowledgement, and a few even asked how long he had been practicing. He answered shyly, not used to such attention, but inside he felt a spark. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe the laughter would not define him anymore. He had discovered a strength he did not know he had, a confidence that grew from the quiet corners of practice, patience, and a deep love for music. That night, back at home, he sat at the piano once more. The house was quiet, the fading light casting long shadows over the room. He played for himself, letting the notes tell his story, a story of persistence, courage, and hope. The old piano, once just a piece of furniture, had become a companion, a witness to his journey, and a promise of the possibilities ahead. He knew there would be challenges still, moments of doubt, and perhaps more laughter from those who did not understand. But he also knew that he had found something worth fighting for, something that gave him a voice when words had failed, and a power to transform the mockery into admiration. One note at a time. In those hours, he dreamed of the future, imagining stages bigger than the small school auditorium, audiences larger than he could count, and music that could touch hearts far beyond his own. He imagined a world where his talent was recognized, where dedication was respected, and where he could inspire others to keep pursuing their passions, no matter the obstacles. But for now, he was content with this first victory. The first time he had faced ridicule and let his music speak louder than the mockery, the boy knew that this was only the beginning, that his journey was long and would require more practice, more determination, and more courage. But he also knew that he had taken the first step, and that step had changed everything. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge to his dreams, a companion in solitude, and a testament to the power of never giving up. And so, in the quiet of his home, surrounded by the familiar hum of the city outside, he played on each note a promise, each melody a declaration that he would not be defined by laughter, but by the music he created and the dreams he dared to follow. After the talent show, something changed for him. He returned home that evening feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. He had faced the audience, faced the laughter and whispers, and yet had managed to make music that captured attention. But even with the applause and congratulations, he knew this was just the beginning. He wanted to get better, to master the piano in a way that would leave no room for doubt. He sat at the old piano in the corner of his living room and ran his fingers across the keys, thinking about what he had learned from performing in front of others. Each note carried a lesson about courage, persistence, and the power of self-belief. From that day forward, he dedicated himself even more to practice. Early in the morning, before anyone else in the house was awake, he would sit at the piano, slowly and carefully going over scales, finger exercises, and pieces he wanted to master. Late at night, after finishing homework, he would return to the piano, playing softly so as not to disturb the neighbors. Some days were frustrating. His fingers would fumble, his rhythm would falter, and he would feel like giving up. But every time he thought about quitting, he remembered the faces of the audience, the surprise in their eyes, and the moment when laughter had turned into admiration. That memory became a fuel that pushed him forward. He also sought help wherever he could find it. He discovered online tutorials and videos, watching skilled pianists carefully, trying to imitate their techniques. He took notes, practicing slowly and deliberately, repeating difficult sections until his fingers remembered the movements before his mind could even think about them. It was a slow process, but it was steady. Every day, his playing grew more confident, more precise, and more expressive. The music was no longer just a series of notes. It had begun to carry emotion, a reflection of his determination, his struggles, and his dreams. Despite his dedication, he still faced challenges from people around him. Some of his classmates continued to tease him, doubting that a boy from a quiet home could ever become truly skilled at an instrument that seemed so complicated and distant from their own interests. At first, their words hurt. He could hear the whispers as he walked through the school corridors, the snickers when he mentioned the piano, and the judgmental glances during group projects. But gradually, he began to see these moments as opportunities. Each mocking comment became a motivation to prove himself, not to them, but to himself. Every laugh he faced was a reminder to keep practicing, to work harder, and to let his music speak louder than any words. One afternoon, a teacher noticed him playing during lunch in the music room. The boy had been quietly practicing alone, unaware of the observer. The teacher listened for a few moments, impressed by the dedication and the subtle emotion in the music. After he finished, the teacher approached, offering words of encouragement and advice. They suggested some exercises, shared small techniques to improve finger strength, and recommended pieces that would challenge him further. For the boy, this was a turning point. Having someone recognize his potential and guide him made a huge difference. It was validation that his efforts were not in vain, and a reminder that dedication could open doors to new opportunities. Encouraged, he started pushing himself even further. He chose more challenging pieces, ones that would take weeks or even months to master. At first, the complexity was overwhelming. There were moments when he could not keep up, when mistakes piled up and frustration set in. But he learned to be patient, understanding that mastery required time, perseverance, and a willingness to fail repeatedly. Every mistake became a lesson, every failure a stepping stone. Slowly, the pieces that once seemed impossible began to come together, note by note, hand position by hand position. The music began to flow more naturally, and he could feel the emotion behind each melody deepening, connecting him to the piano in a way he had never felt before. His dedication did not go unnoticed for long. Some classmates who had mocked him initially began to watch from afar. They observed his determination, how he returned day after day, night after night, tirelessly improving. Curiosity replaced some of the mockery. They began asking questions, timidly at first, about how he practiced or how he learned certain pieces. The boy responded politely, sometimes shyly, but always with patience. He realized that his progress was not only changing the perception of others, but it was also shaping him into a more confident, resilient person. He also learned more about expressing emotion through music. At first, his playing had been precise, but mechanical, following the notes exactly as written. Now, he experimented with dynamics, tempo, and phrasing. He tried playing softly in some parts and loudly in others, feeling how the music could tell a story beyond words. He noticed how certain notes could convey sadness, joy, tension, or excitement. Each practice session became more than just repetition. It became an exploration of feeling and creativity. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a companion, a voice through which he could share his inner world. As his skills improved, he began to think about performing again. The memory of the talent show remained vivid, and he wanted to build on that experience. He imagined a slightly larger audience, a more attentive crowd, and the possibility of truly leaving them speechless with his music. The idea both thrilled and terrified him. But he knew that fear was natural and that it could be used as fuel rather than an obstacle. He spent hours imagining the performance in his mind, envisioning each step, each note, and the emotions he wanted to convey. The boy also faced practical challenges. His piano, old and worn, occasionally had keys that stuck or notes that sounded off. Some evenings, it required adjustments that he could not make on his own. Yet instead of becoming frustrated, he learned to work with the instrument as it was, understanding its nuances, and even finding ways to incorporate its imperfections into his playing. This resilience became part of his growth, teaching him that true skill often involved adapting to circumstances rather than waiting for perfect conditions. At school, the shift in perception continued. The students who had been skeptical began to see his commitment and skill. A few classmates even started expressing admiration for his work ethic. They did not understand everything about the piano, nor did they fully grasp the depth of his talent, but they could see the results. Some of them began cheering him on quietly, offering words of encouragement, and slowly, the boy found himself surrounded by a small group of supporters. It was a subtle change, but it made a significant difference. The journey that had begun with mockery was gradually turning into one of respect, curiosity, and cautious admiration. One day, a larger opportunity presented itself. A local music event was announced, a chance for young musicians to showcase their talents beyond the confines of the school auditorium. The boy felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was bigger than anything he had faced before. The audience would be unfamiliar, the stakes higher, and the scrutiny sharper. Yet, he also saw it as a challenge, a way to measure his growth and to see how far he had come. He knew it would require more preparation, more focus, and even more courage. He dedicated himself to this new goal with intensity. Each day after school, he would practice for hours, carefully studying pieces that would challenge his skills and highlight his strengths. He worked on timing, expression, and transitions, ensuring that each piece was polished and emotionally engaging. His hands became stronger, his memory sharper, and his connection to the piano deeper. The music that once felt like a pastime had transformed into a craft, one that demanded patience, discipline, and a relentless drive to improve. In this period, the boy also learned about the power of self-reflection. After each practice session, he would take a moment to think about what went well and what needed improvement. He recorded himself on a small phone, listening carefully to the playback, noticing mistakes, and making adjustments. He realized that growth was a continuous process, and that self-awareness was just as important as talent. This approach helped him become not only a better musician, but also a more thoughtful, patient, and focused individual. The anticipation of the local music event brought a new layer of excitement. He imagined the reactions of the audience, the moment when silence would fall as the first note played, and the crescendo of applause at the end. The thought of leaving people speechless became a powerful motivator. Yet, he reminded himself to stay grounded, to focus on the music and the story he wanted to tell through it. The goal was not just to impress, but to communicate, to connect, and to convey the passion that had driven him this far. As the days passed, the boy noticed that his confidence had grown. He was no longer the timid child who feared laughter. He had become someone who could face challenges head-on, someone who understood the value of hard work, persistence, and patience. The music had given him a voice when words had failed, a way to express what he felt inside, and a sense of identity that went beyond what others thought of him. He had learned that true skill was not about perfection, but about dedication, growth, and the courage to keep going, despite setbacks. Finally, the day of the local music event arrived. The boy felt a familiar mix of fear and excitement. He had prepared, practiced, and dreamed of this moment countless times. As he waited backstage, he reminded himself of the journey he had taken, the hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the encouragement from teachers, and the gradual shift in perception from mockery to respect. He took a deep breath, focusing on the music that had become his companion and guide. He knew that whatever happened next, he had already grown immensely from the boy who had once been laughed at for simply loving the piano. When his turn came, he walked onto the stage with steady steps, his hands moving instinctively to the piano keys. The lights were bright, the audience attentive, and the hall filled with expectation. He began to play. The weeks following the local music event were some of the most exciting and challenging of his life. He had felt the thrill of performing for a larger audience, the pride in seeing people respond to his music, and the rush of accomplishment after months of hard work. Yet, he knew that this was only a step on a much longer journey. If he wanted to continue growing, he needed to push himself further, to face even bigger challenges, and to refine his skills in ways he had never imagined. Each day, he woke up early, sometimes even before the sun rose, to practice on his old piano. The cold keys beneath his fingers reminded him that dedication required sacrifice. He spent hours working on complex pieces, focusing on every detail, the placement of his fingers, the flow of the notes, and the emotions each section should convey. There were moments when frustration threatened to take over, when his hands would cramp or a section of music refused to come together. But he had learned to be patient with himself, to break each problem into smaller parts, and to approach it methodically. Slowly, note by note, piece by piece, he improved. He also began to experiment more with his own interpretations of music. No longer satisfied with simply playing notes correctly, he explored how to convey mood and story through his performance. He tried soft, delicate touches that could express sadness or longing, and bold, forceful strokes that could convey strength or excitement. Each practice session became a journey of self-expression, teaching him not only about music, but also about himself. He discovered that through the piano he could share feelings he could not easily put into words, emotions that he had carried quietly inside for years. School life continued, though it no longer felt quite as intimidating. Some students still whispered or teased, but many had begun to notice his dedication. A few classmates even started asking questions, curious about how he had become so skilled. The boy answered patiently, sharing small tips about practice or explaining how he approached difficult pieces. This interaction was new to him. While he had once been shy and withdrawn, now he was gradually learning to communicate, to inspire curiosity, and to show that passion and effort could lead to real results. Even those who had mocked him at first began to look at him differently, a mixture of respect and quiet admiration replacing the skepticism. Around this time, a teacher suggested that he participate in a more significant regional music competition. The idea excited him, but it also filled him with anxiety. This would be a much larger stage, with more experienced musicians and a bigger audience. The thought of performing in front of strangers who had high expectations was intimidating. Yet he realized that growth came from stepping out of comfort zones, from challenging himself, and from facing fears head-on. He accepted the invitation, determined to prepare as thoroughly as possible. His preparation for the competition became an all-consuming task. After school, he would retreat to his piano, dedicating hours to practice, analyzing every section of his chosen pieces. He focused on difficult passages, repeating them until his fingers moved almost automatically. He worked on transitions, dynamics, and timing, ensuring that each note would convey the intended emotion. Sometimes the room was filled with the sounds of repeated mistakes, frustration, and sighs. Other times, the music flowed beautifully, filling the small living room with melodies that seemed to come alive. He knew that every practice session brought him closer to his goal. Along the way, he discovered new ways to stay motivated. He recorded himself regularly, listening critically to playback and identifying areas that needed improvement. He also imagined the performance in vivid detail, the audience watching, the lights shining down, the moment when the first note would sound, and the hush that would follow. This visualization helped him prepare mentally, not just physically. He learned that confidence was built not only by skill, but by belief in oneself, and by imagining success even before it happened. His family began to notice the changes too. They had always supported him, but now they saw the depth of his dedication, the seriousness with which he approached the piano. They provided encouragement, sometimes helping him with meals so he could focus on practice, or creating quiet spaces for him to play. Their support gave him strength, reinforcing the idea that he was not alone on this journey. Even small gestures a compliment, a nod of approval. A shared smile were enough to boost his morale, remind him of why he kept pushing forward. When the day of the regional competition arrived, he felt a familiar mix of fear and excitement. The auditorium was larger than any he had performed in before, filled with chairs, bright lights, and people who had come to see young musicians perform. Backstage, he felt his nerves rising, his palms sweaty, and his heart racing. Yet, he also remembered all the practice, all the late nights, all the struggles that had led to this moment. He reminded himself that he had prepared, that he had grown, and that the music was a part of him that could speak louder than any fear. When he was called to the stage, he walked forward steadily, taking a deep breath. The audience was attentive, a mixture of students, teachers, and local music enthusiasts. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed his fingers on the keys. The first note resonated through the hall, clear and confident. He allowed the music to flow naturally, letting emotion guide his fingers. With each passage, the audience could feel his dedication, his journey, and his love for the piano. During the performance, he noticed the audience's reactions subtly changing. At first, some faces were neutral, waiting to be impressed. As the music continued, more people leaned forward, captivated by the sound, the rhythm, and the emotion he conveyed. The hall seemed to hold its breath, listening to every note, absorbed in the story the music was telling. The boy felt a sense of connection that he had never experienced before. Through the piano, he was communicating something deeply personal, something that transcended words. By the time he reached the final passages, he was playing with a confidence and fluidity that amazed even himself. The music was no longer just a series of practiced notes. It had become a living, breathing expression of his journey. The applause that followed the last note was overwhelming. Some audience members rose to their feet, others whispered words of admiration, and a few even had tears in their eyes. He felt a rush of relief, pride, and joy, knowing that all the hours of practice, all the challenges, and all the doubt had led to this moment. After the performance, people came forward to congratulate him. Some of the other participants, who had initially seemed distant or competitive, expressed genuine admiration. Teachers and organizers praised his technical skill and emotional expression. Even some students who had once mocked him approached quietly, acknowledging his talent and dedication. He responded humbly, grateful for their words. Yet the real reward was internal, a growing confidence, and the realization that persistence, patience, and hard work could truly lead to success. In the days following the competition, the boy reflected on his progress. He realized that his journey was far from over. There would always be new challenges, new pieces to master, and bigger audiences to perform for. But he also understood that each step, no matter how small, was part of building a foundation for lasting skill and fulfillment. The experience had taught him about resilience, the value of practice, and the power of belief in oneself. He continued practicing daily, exploring new techniques and more challenging compositions. He began to write down his thoughts and feelings about music, using the piano not only to play existing pieces, but also to experiment with creating his own melodies. Each creation brought a sense of discovery, a realization that his talent was not static, but could grow and evolve with dedication and imagination. The boy also began to see the impact of his journey on those around him. Some classmates who had previously been indifferent now approached him with curiosity and respect. Teachers occasionally used his example to encourage other students to pursue their passions diligently. Even family members took notice of his growing confidence, seeing not only the skill he had developed, but also the maturity, patience, and resilience that had accompanied it in the quiet hours of the evening. When the house was still and the only sound was the soft hum of the city outside, he would sit at his piano, letting his fingers move freely across the keys. The music was no longer just practice. It had become a companion, a voice, and a mirror reflecting his growth. Each note, each melody, carried not only skill but emotion, determination, and the story of a boy who had faced mockery and fear, yet continued to pursue his dream. He dreamed of the future, imagining stages even larger than the regional competition. Audiences filled with people eager to hear his music, and the possibility of inspiring others with his journey. He understood that success was not measured only by applause or recognition, but by the personal growth, courage, and joy that came from pursuing something meaningful. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of his perseverance, a bridge to his dreams, and a testament to the power of following one's passion despite obstacles. Through this period, he realized that the mockery and doubt he had faced were not failures but opportunities. They had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of self-belief. They had challenged him to grow, to practice harder, and to find confidence within himself rather than seeking it from others. And as he played each evening, letting the music flow through him, he felt a quiet assurance that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was capable of facing them and transforming them into something beautiful. This understanding became a guiding principle. The boy approached each new challenge, each new piece of music, with a sense of purpose and determination. He continued to practice, to learn, and to explore, knowing that every note played was part of a larger journey of growth, expression, and self-discovery. He had faced mocker after the regional competition. The boy's life began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. He had experienced the thrill of performing for a large audience. He had learned the strength that came from preparation, perseverance, and facing fears. Now, he was more determined than ever to continue on this path, to challenge himself further, and to use his growing skills to make a deeper impression on the world around him. He spent each day at the piano, sometimes practicing for hours on end, refining his techniques and exploring new pieces. He began to understand that talent alone was not enough. It was dedication, discipline, and a willingness to face difficulties that truly shaped a musician. Each morning, he would wake early to practice scales and exercises that strengthened his fingers and improved his control. In the afternoons, he focused on musical pieces that were technically challenging, learning to interpret them with emotion and precision. And in the evenings, when the house was quiet, he experimented with his own melodies, improvising and expressing feelings that could not be put into words. His progress did not go unnoticed. Teachers, neighbors, and a few classmates who had once been indifferent began to see the dedication behind his talent. Some offered words of encouragement, others asked questions about his techniques, and a few even asked to watch him practice to learn from his discipline. This recognition, while subtle at first, gave him confidence and reinforced his commitment. He realized that his music had the power not only to express himself but also to inspire curiosity and admiration in others. Despite this growing respect, challenges remained. Some students still doubted his abilities or dismissed his achievements. There were moments when their laughter or whispers reached him, testing his patience and resolve. But he had learned to use these challenges as fuel, not as obstacles. Each moment of doubt from others became a reminder of why he practiced, why he pushed himself, and why he could not give up. Over time, he began to develop resilience, a quiet strength that allowed him to focus on his goals. Despite distractions or criticism, he also began seeking opportunities beyond school and local events. He learned about music workshops, master classes, and competitions in neighboring towns. Each of these opportunities represented a chance to test his skills, to gain new experiences, and to measure his growth against other talented musicians. At first, the thought of performing in new, unfamiliar settings was intimidating. The stages were bigger, the audiences unfamiliar, and the expectations higher. But he embraced the challenge, understanding that growth often came from stepping outside comfort zones. The preparation for these events became more structured. He created a schedule that balanced practice, study, and rest. He divided his time between perfecting familiar pieces and learning new, more complex compositions. He paid attention not only to technical skill, but also to emotional expression, understanding that music was as much about feeling as it was about notes. He practiced performing from start to finish, imagining the audience, the stage, and the reactions, building both confidence and stamina. During this time, he also formed relationships with mentors who guided him. Music teachers, experienced performers, and even online instructors offered advice, techniques, and feedback. They helped him refine his posture, finger positioning, and interpretation. They encouraged him to take risks, to experiment, and to push beyond what he thought was possible. Their guidance was invaluable, and he learned to accept constructive criticism with humility. Understanding that it was a tool for growth rather than a judgment of his worth, school life continued in parallel. By now, many classmates had shifted their perceptions. Some who had previously mocked him now expressed genuine curiosity, while others simply observed quietly, acknowledging his dedication. These changes, though subtle, reinforced the importance of perseverance and self-belief. The boy realized that while recognition was rewarding, the true measure of progress was internal, the knowledge that he was improving, learning, and expressing himself through his music. The boy also learned to manage pressure and expectation. Each new performance, whether in a workshop, a competition, or a public recital, brought its own challenges. He experienced nervousness, self-doubt, and fear of mistakes. Yet with each event, he discovered strategies to manage these feelings. Deep breathing, visualization, focusing on the music rather than the audience, and remembering the hours of practice that had prepared him. These techniques allowed him to perform with confidence, turning anxiety into energy that enhanced his expression. One day, received an invitation to perform at a prominent community concert. The opportunity was significant, as the audience would include not only local residents but also music enthusiasts and professionals. The boy felt both excitement and apprehension. The stakes were higher, the audience larger, and the expectations more demanding. But he saw it as a chance to challenge himself, to showcase his growth, to continue building his confidence and skill. Preparation for the concert was intense. He devoted hours to perfecting the pieces he would perform, paying careful attention to every note, pause, and dynamic change. He also worked on the presentation, considering posture, expression, and the way he would connect with the audience. Each practice session was a test of patience, focus, and endurance. He encountered mistakes and setbacks, but he approached them methodically, breaking down difficult passages, repeating them, and slowly mastering them. Every challenge became an opportunity to learn and improve. As the day of the concert approached, he thought about the early days when his classmates mocked him, small victories that built his confidence, and the moments of growth that came from persistent practice. He realized that each step, no matter how small, had contributed to who he had become. This reflection gave him a sense of calm and purpose. He knew that while the performance was important, the real achievement was the growth he had experienced along the way. On the day of the concert, he arrived early, taking time to familiarize himself with the stage and the piano. The audience began to fill the hall, a mix of familiar faces and strangers, all eager to listen. Backstage, he felt the familiar surge of nerves, the flutter of anticipation. He reminded himself to focus on the music, to let the notes speak, and to trust in the hours of practice that had prepared him. He took a deep breath, visualized the performance, and stepped onto the stage with steady steps and quiet confidence. The performance began, and he allowed himself to be fully immersed in the music. His fingers moved gracefully over the keys, producing melodies that flowed seamlessly from one passage to the next. He conveyed emotion through dynamics, tempo, and phrasing, connecting with the audience in a way that went beyond words. As the performance progressed, he noticed the reactions of the audience faces leaning forward, his eyes attentive, and expressions of genuine admiration. It was a moment of connection, where the music became a bridge between him and everyone listening. By the end of the performance, the hall erupted in applause. Some audience members stood, clapping enthusiastically, while others whispered words of admiration. The boy felt a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet joy. He had faced the challenge, performed with skill and emotion, and left an impression on the audience. The journey from being mocked at first to gaining recognition and respect had been long, but every moment of practice, every moment of perseverance, had contributed to this triumph. In the days following the concert, the boy reflected on the experience. He realized that his journey was about more than recognition. It was about growth, resilience, and self-expression. He understood that challenges and setbacks were not obstacles, but opportunities to learn, improve, and become stronger. The mockery he had faced in the past had been transformed into motivation, guiding him toward excellence and inspiring him to continue pursuing his passion. The boy continued to practice, explore new techniques, and expand his repertoire. He also began to mentor others, sharing his experiences and offering guidance to those who wanted to learn. He found fulfillment in helping others discover the joy of music. Understanding that his journey could inspire and support someone else's path, this sense of purpose deepened his connection to music and strengthened his determination to keep growing as he looked toward the future. The boy dreamed of even greater opportunities. He imagined performing on larger stages, reaching wider audiences, continuing to challenge himself with increasingly complex and expressive pieces. He also envisioned inspiring others to pursue their passions, to face challenges with courage, and to find their voice through dedication and creativity. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of his journey, a companion in solitude, and a tool for connection, expression, and inspiration. Through all these experiences, he realized that the path of growth was continuous. There would always be new challenges, higher standards, and moments of self-doubt. But he also understood that with dedication, perseverance, and belief in himself, he could overcome any obstacle. The journey from being mocked to being respected was not only about skill, but about character, resilience, and the courage to pursue a dream despite fear and doubt in the quiet of his home. At the piano that had been with him through every step of his journey, he reflected on all he had learned. The boy had transformed from someone who feared judgment to someone who embraced challenges. From a novice with raw talent to a musician with skill, expression, and confidence, the piano had been his constant companion, witness, and guide, teaching him lessons that extended far beyond music lessons about patience, persistence, courage, and the power of following one's passion. And as he played, he knew that the journey was far from over, that there were still heights to reach and melodies to explore, but he felt ready to face whatever came next. Confident in his ability to grow, inspire, and Levi, the day of the final, most important performance of his young life, arrived with a mix of excitement, anticipation, and nerves that made his heart race like never before. This was not just another school event or local concert. It was a prestigious citywide competition that would bring together the most talented young musicians from all around. The stakes were higher, the audience larger, and the scrutiny more intense. Yet, he had prepared for this moment for months, and he knew that he had reached a level where his music could speak for him in a way words never could. He arrived early, allowing himself time to acclimate to the stage and the grand piano that awaited him. It was shiny and new, a stark contrast to his old familiar instrument at home. The keys gleamed under the bright stage lights, and the boy felt a sense of reverence, almost as if he were standing before something sacred. He sat on the bench, adjusted his posture, and allowed his hands to rest lightly on the keys. He took a deep breath, recalling every hour of practice, every challenge he had faced, every moment of doubt that he had overcome. In that instant, he realized that all of it had led him here, and he was ready to pour everything he had into this performance backstage. The air buzzed with the energy of other young musicians preparing for their own performances. Some were stretching, some whispering notes to themselves, and others simply staring into space, lost in thought. The boy tried not to be distracted. He focused inward, centering himself on the music and the story he wanted to tell through it. He visualized the audience, the lights, the stage, and the way the music would unfold. It was a form of mental rehearsal that calmed his nerves and strengthened his confidence. When his name was called, he walked to the stage with measured steps. Each footfall was deliberate, grounded in the confidence he had built over years of practice and performances. The audience was enormous, filling every seat, and he could feel their collective anticipation. Some faces were familiar, others strangers, but all were there to witness talent and expression. He took one final deep breath and let his fingers glide over the keys. Beginning with the first note that would open the story he had prepared so carefully, the music flowed naturally. Each passage a reflection of countless hours of practice, resilience, and emotion. The boy had learned not only to play notes correctly, but to imbue them with meaning, telling a story without words. Soft passages carried tenderness and vulnerability, while more forceful moments expressed determination and passion. The audience, initially silent and attentive, began to respond unconsciously to the ebb and flow of the music, leaning forward, closing their eyes, and letting the melodies wash over them.